Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 3 of Music Theory for Electronic Music Producers. In this episode, we will be looking at harmony. In this series, each video builds upon one another, so if you haven't yet, I would recommend that you watch the first 2 episodes on rhythm and melody before you watch this video. For demonstration, I've already prepared an A minor scale. The major and minor scales are special because there is a simple trick that you can use to harmonize your melodies. First, let's listen to the minor scale again. So, to start harmonizing, we will start on the first note of the scale, in this case an A, and then we will skip one note and play the next note, so in this case a C, and we repeat the same procedure. So we skip one note and we play an E. We have now built our first chord based on the note of A. We number our chords using Roman numerals. So in this case, the A chord would also be the 1 chord. Now we move on to the next note of the scale and we repeat the same procedure. So we skip one note and we play the D. We skip one note and we play the F. And we have the 2 chord of our minor scale. Then we repeat the same procedure for all the other notes in the scale until we've harmonized everything in the scale. Let's quickly listen to what we have obtained. So the exact same procedure would also work for a major scale. So we could get an A major scale by changing some of the notes in our scale like this. And then if we repeat the same procedure again, so we skip one note, we play the C sharp, we skip one note, we play the E, we move on to the next note, we skip one note, we play the D, we skip one note, we play the F sharp, and we repeat that for the entire scale. And we get something which sounds like this. So using this procedure, we can get one of 3 different types of chords. We can get major chords, minor chords, or diminished chords. Now, if we take a listen to each of these chords, musicians tend to think that major chords sound brighter or happier than minor chords. On the other hand, diminished chords tend to sound less stable or more dissonant than both major and minor chords, and therefore the types of chords that we use in our melody can be a very important tool to create different types of moods or emotions in our music. So let's try applying this simple trick to harmonize our melody from last week's episode. Let's quickly just listen to this first part that we've harmonized. So this doesn't sound bad in my opinion. I sometimes use this trick to harmonize some of my melodies, but it does sound a bit unusual, not like what you would usually hear in music. So why is that? So first off, chords tend to change less often than the melody. A good rule of thumb is that chords should not change more than once every measure. If you don't know what a measure is, check out my episode on rhythm. Second, we're using many different types of chords to harmonize our melody. You might have heard the saying that popular music only makes use of 4 chords. These chords in both major and minor scales are the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords. So if we go back to our scales, this would be the 1 chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, this would be the 4 chord, this would be the 5 chord, and this would be the 6 chord. And the same thing again in major. So the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, and finally the 6 chord. So using these ideas, let's try to harmonize our melody again. So having only the 4 basic pop chords, the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chord, and also only changing our harmony once every measure. So let's start on the 1 chord, which is an A minor chord. On the next measure, let's move on to the 6 chord, which would be an F major chord. Then let's move on to the 4 chord, which would be a D minor chord. And finally, let's play the 5 chord, which is the E minor chord. And then we just repeat the same progression of chords for the next 4 measures. So let's listen to what this sounds like. So this sounds a bit more like what you would typically hear in pop music. However, you might also want to learn how to make use of the other chords in minor and major scales, and not only limit yourself to the 4 basic pop chords. To do this, we can use chord substitutions. So if we go back to our chords, you can notice, for example, that if we look at our 5 chord, which is this one, and if we look at our 7 chords, which is this one, these two chords are very closely related to one another because they share 2 of the same notes. So if we listen to these chords, you will hear how they sound quite similar to one another. Right? So based on this idea, we can create families of chords that are related to one another. And in major and minor scales, musicians typically divide chords into 3 different types of families, which are the tonic family, which contains the 1, the 3, and the 6 chord, the subdominant family, which contains the 2 and the 4 chord, and finally the dominant family, which contains the 5 and the 7 chord. And then, as long as you stay within the same chord family, you can substitute chords for one another. So let's apply this to our melody. So for instance, at the here we are playing a 5 chord, which is in the dominant family of chords, and we could substitute this chord for a 7 chord, which is also in the dominant family of chords, which would, in the case of A minor, be a G major chord. So let's just quickly change it to a G major, like this. To give you another example, here we have a 6 chord, the F major chord. The 6 chord is in the tonic family of chords, so we could substitute it for a 1 chord or a 3 chord. So let's substitute it for a 3 chord, for example, which would be, what would that be? That would be a C major chord. So let's quickly change this chord to C major. And let's listen to what this harmony sounds like now. Right, so we've substituted the chords, but the harmony still works just fine. Now, another thing which is important to point out is that very often chord progressions tend to move from the tonic family of chords to the subdominant family to the dominant family and finally back to the tonic family of chords. So for instance, in this case, we are moving from a tonic chord to another tonic chord to a subdominant chord to a dominant chord and back to a tonic chord, and we repeat this same progression over and over again. So that was the theory on basic harmony if you're using major and minor scales. So let's try to use this theoretical knowledge and apply it when we introduce more elements into our music. So what I'm actually going to do, first let's remove our chord substitutions. Go back to the basic 1, 4, 5, 6 chords. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this piano in here, delete it from the other one. And basically I have here another piano which is muted. So what is the point of this muted piano? I will use these notes as guidelines when I place my other elements. So let's quickly take our chords, let's shift them up the octave, shift them down the octave, and we will use this as visual guidelines when we place our other elements to start harmonizing with our main melody. So for instance, let's start off with a bass right here. And right, so you see I'm following the guideline. And you could also play some other notes, like for example this one. You're pretty free to experiment around with what might sound good or not good. So for example, something like this. So this is going to be our first element of harmony. So another thing which is important is that these notes are only guidelines. So you don't necessarily need to follow these notes exactly. So for instance, we could have another instrument playing some notes outside of this harmony. In this case, we are playing chromatic notes or blue notes, which are notes which are just adjacent to the harmony that we are playing. That's often a trick that you can use, which sounds very nice. So let's put in some notes here which follow our guideline for the most part. And we get something which sounds like this. So here I'm changing the dynamics a little bit. If you want to know how you can change the dynamics, you can watch my video on rhythm, where I go over some basic rules that you can follow when it comes to dynamics in music. So let's listen to that. So let's also add another bass. And notice how, for the most part, I'm just following the same guideline. And finally, let's add another muted guitar. A bit like this. Right, and again, you can add some notes which are outside of our guidelines if they sound good. So for example, let's add here some notes. Let's see how this sounds like. Right, let's add another. And right at the end of the day, music is about whatever sounds right. So if you want to play, I don't know, this note for instance, if you think it sounds good, why not, right? So let's just quickly listen to the entire thing, listen to how it sounds like. So that's certainly something that we can work with. So that's what I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the third episode of Music Theory for Electronic Music Producers on harmony. If you liked this episode, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on the next episode. In the next episode, we will put everything together that we've learned and go over some general arrangement tips and tricks. Thanks for watching and take care.